Hello there guys. Some of you may know I'm a huge fan of George R.R. Martin, best known for authoring the Song of Ice and Fire book series, which were eventually adapted into the hit TV show Game of Thrones. What a lot of people don't know is that before Game of Thrones, well actually right in the middle of him writing the first book, George took a 2-year-long break in the early 1990s to write a failed pilot for a TV show called Doorways. The premise of the show would have explored two characters traveling across alternate universes and going on little adventures to worlds where the dinosaurs didn't die out or where Germany won World War II, that kind of stuff. The 1993 pilot still exists, and you can easily watch it over here on YouTube, but I'll save you the trouble because it kind of sucks, and I totally understand why it didn't get picked up, and is now pretty much completely forgotten. There's bad acting, low budget, and is mainly just kind of boring. And people can be grateful that it failed, because if it hadn't, George R. Martin freely admits that he would have probably never finished writing the little fantasy novel he was working on at the time, called A Game of Thrones. Had Doorways been successful, it would have sucked away all his time and attention away from dragons and ice zombies. Yes, this TV show almost killed Game of Thrones. Many of us would probably have never heard the name George R. Martin had it not been cancelled. Something I found interesting about the pilot was the cliffhanger. At the end of the episode, the characters of Thomas and Kat escape through a magical doorway and land atop a mountain. As the camera pans out, we can see that they landed on Mount Rushmore. But the faces on this Mount Rushmore are much different than those of our world. The familiar faces of US Presidents George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, Teddy Roosevelt, and Abraham Lincoln have been replaced. Presumably in the next episode, we would have learned all about this alternate universe and its strange US presidents. But that didn't happen, of course. I actually watched the Doorways pilot with fellow YouTubers and George R. Martin nerds, Preston Jacobs and Carmine of Red Team Review, and once we reached this part, we were kind of curious to identify all the faces on the mountain, and infer what was supposed to happen in the following episode. Outside the easily recognizable face of Benjamin Franklin, however, we didn't really recognize anybody, at least not definitively. There's a guy with a raccoon skin hat and a Native American, but we didn't really know who they were specifically supposed to be. And because the pilot failed and no second episode was produced, a part of us had to accept that we would likely never know. However, people who know me know I hate unresolved questions, even if they are totally pointless in the end. Check out my eye doctor video for that. So it might be unsurprising to learn that I took it upon myself to hunt down some answers for Doorway's 1993 failed TV show pilot. Who were all these faces supposed to be? What was going to be the deal with this alternate universe of America in the next, never-to-be-finished episode of Doorways? What was going to happen after this cliffhanger? Well, just by looking at them, outside the obvious one, the faces on Doorway's Mount Rushmore aren't super recognizable, and maybe this is partly why the pilot failed. As I said, my friends and I were kind of scratching our heads even after giving it a good hour of discussion and debate, probably more thought anyone has bothered to give this show in over 30 years. I eventually tried crowdsourcing my quest for answers through Twitter and Reddit to add some fresh eyes, and I ended up getting a ton of suggestions. It's pretty clear that the guy in the raccoon skin hat was supposed to be either Davy Crockett or Daniel Boone. For the Native American head on the far right, people suggested Sitting Bull, Geronimo, Crazy Horse, and basically any other Native American leader of note that you could think of. The clean-shaven face hidden in the back, some suggested was Alexander Hamilton, Susan B. Anthony, and William Clark or Meriwether Lewis. But all this was pretty much just conjecture. And in my opinion, everyone's guess was as good as anyone else's. In order to really settle the debate, we needed to get firm confirmation from an authoritative source. And well, Preston Jacobs thought a good place to start would be by looking at George R. Martin's original script for the Doorways pilot, which Martin published many years later as part of his Dream Songs collection. As it turns out, however, Mount Rushmore didn't appear in his original draft. Instead, the episode Cliffhanger left off with the characters in a post-apocalyptic Earth, where civilization has reverted to medieval technology. The Mount Rushmore scene was added by the studio because the original ending was apparently too dark and depressing. Okay, that didn't work, Maybe there's a behind-the-scenes crew member who worked on this 32-year-old failed and forgotten TV pilot that I could ask. Despite my research, I couldn't reach anyone, at least not directly, not even the somewhat elusive George R. Martin himself. The closest thing I could get was a blog post dated to 2003 on a website called Andy's Anachronisms. The poster, presumably Andy, had the rare opportunity to view the Doorways pilot at the 61st Annual Science Fiction World Convention, at which George R. Martin was the guest of honor. He presented the pilot and talked about it briefly to the audience at a panel. Andy gives a pretty short summary of the episode. When he reaches the cliffhanger, he describes it like this. According to his blog post, the faces were Susan B. Anthony, Benjamin Franklin, Davy Crockett, and an unknown Native American figure. Now, it is unclear if Andy got this identification directly from George at the panel, or if this is just his assumption. For reasons I will explain in a second, I lean towards the latter, that these are just his guesses. Although I agree with the IDs of Benjamin Franklin and Davy Crockett, I don't think the third face looks particularly like Susan B. Anthony, and the fact that Native American face is left unidentified isn't really satisfying either. I feel like Andy's blog is just another dead end. Digging a little deeper, I discovered that there was a comic adaptation of Doorways made more recently, between 2010 and 2011, and illustrated by the artist Stefan Martino. The comic was produced to kind of capitalize on George's at the time recent success with the Game of Thrones TV show. Scrolling to the end of the comic, we can see that it does contain the pilot's Mount Rushmore scene. But to make things even more confusing, the faces in this version are different from the TV show. The Benjamin Franklin and Native American heads have clearly been replaced. The Davy Crockett head has been shifted to the far left and is now accompanied by 3 entirely different faces. Who are these guys now? Jesse Pinkman? Joseph Smith? The Doorways comic just raises more questions instead of answers. Why was there even a change? I felt like the one person who knew might be the guy that drew them, so I reached out to the artist, Stefan Martino, and asked if he remembered working on the project, and he kindly replied. Martino apparently did not watch a single second of the TV show pilot, and relied exclusively on George's notes during his drawing process. At first, he didn't recall whose heads were on Mount Rushmore, but said he would look at his old emails containing Martin's notes. Within the day, he sent me a screen cap of an email from 2011, presumably from George R. Martin. I just want to make sure, that's my George R. Martin impression. I just want to make sure you had the change to Mount Rushmore's faces. They are the 4 faces carved there in the granite are Benjamin Franklin, Davy Crockett, William Jennings Bryan, and the Shawnee War Chief Tecumseh. Oh my gosh, my George R. Martin sounds really sick and strained, oh my goodness. Anyways, the wording here is a bit confusing, but it seems like what is being described here is the TV show's version of Mount Rushmore, and not the version that would end up in Martino's comic. George R. Martin appears to have asked Martino to change the TV show version of the faces to new ones, for reasons that are not exactly clear. Nonetheless, we have an answer. Mount Rushmore in the 1993 TV show pilot version of Doorways goes as follows. Founding Father Benjamin Franklin, frontiersman Davy Crockett, 3 times failed Democratic presidential candidate William Jennings Bryan, and the Shawnee Chief Tecumseh. Presumably, in this alternate universe, Ben Franklin was elected first president of the United States instead of Washington, Davy Crockett wasn't killed in the Alamo, William Jennings Bryan was elected president instead of William McKinley, and Tecumseh wasn't killed in the War of 1812. One can only imagine how different America must have been in this story, had we gotten the chance to see it. As for the comic version, my crowdsourced hunt on Twitter and Reddit also eventually bore fruit. As it turns out, all 4 of the faces on the mountain are those of Texas revolutionaries, referenced directly from historical paintings, making their identifications pretty definitive. They are Davy Crockett, William Travis, James Bowie, and James Fannin. If I were to guess, the alternate universe in this version was a universe where Texas won the infamous Battle of the Alamo in 1836. In the battle, at least in our world, Davy Crockett, William Travis, and James Bowie were killed fighting against the Mexican army, and James Fannin was killed not long after. It seems like in the Doorways universe, after winning the Battle of the Alamo, all 4 of these men went on to become important military leaders. Perhaps the Republic of Texas still exists in this world, and never became part of the United States at all. So, there you have it. the answers to this failed TV show cliffhanger nobody cares about. A cliffhanger that, had we actually gotten resolution for, would have killed Game of Thrones and likely George R. R. Martin's career. I can sleep peacefully now. I hope you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you next time. This was a bit of an untraditional one, but we might get back to normal later, alright? This was just fun. I like sharing my passions with you guys. Okay, bye!